Today in Edge of Eternities, we get our exclusive MTG Goldfish preview card, some spicy Spacecraft, a card that looks a lot like Sunfall at home, and so much more. Let's break it down. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Edge of Eternities spoilers. So today we kick off week 2 of spoiler season. By the end of this week, we will have the entire set, but today we got some pretty interesting stuff to talk about, including our exclusive MTG Goldfish preview cards, thanks to Wizards for hooking us up, which means we should probably jump right into it, start talking sweet new Edge of Eternities cards. Before we do, 2 quick reminders. First, if you need any of these cards, you can snag them from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Second, to keep up on all the latest previews throughout the day, you should head on over to MTGpreviews.com. Anyway, let's talk Edge of Eternities. First up today, we get not just 1, but 2 exclusive preview cards to show off for y'all. Thanks to Wizards for hooking us up with the free previews. So we have Honored Knight Captain in Radiant Strike. So Radiant Strike, it's pretty simple. It's not a constructed card. It might be an okay limited removal spell, but 4 mana instant, destroy target artifact or tap creature, you gain 3 life. The card's just too expensive for constructed, right? Getting rid of an artifact is like 1 or 2 mana. Getting rid of a tap creature is probably 2 mana. Yeah, gaining 3 life is a nice little bonus, but really it's just too much mana to play in your constructed deck, in the main deck, or in the sideboard. Honored Knight Captain, on the other hand, I know it's just an uncommon, but I think this card is actually pretty good. So it's a 2 mana 1/1. It's a human advisor knight. When it enters, you make a 1/1 white human soldier creature token, and then you can pay 6 mana, sacrifice it, tutor an equipment directly onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. So Honored Knight Captain, on level 1, this compares to a bunch of playable cards that we've seen in the past. It turns out, if you look at the history of Magic, 2-drops that are 1/1s that make a 1/1 token tend to be relatively playable. We see Resolute Reinforcement seeing play right now in the Convoke deck in Standard. Raise the Alarm used to see playing black-white tokens in Modern. Goblin Instigator has shown up in some Goblin decks. So it turns out that just adding 2 bodies to the battlefield for 2 mana tends to be pretty good, and I expect the same will be true of Honored Knight Captain. If you think about Standard, the easiest home for this card is playing it alongside Resolute Reinforcement, which I know was originally from Dominaria, but they reprinted it in Foundation, so it doesn't actually rotate, but you play it alongside Resolute Reinforcements in something like the Boros Convoke deck. So Boros Convoke, it is losing Night Errant Eos, which is a pretty big loss. That's the Convoke part of Boros Convoke, but I could still definitely see some sort of like Boros Go Wide aggro deck with War Leader's Car and Arabella taking advantage of Resolute Reinforcements and Honored Knight Captain. The other interesting aspect of this card is it makes 2 humans. So if you're playing some sort of tribal deck, one card that adds 2 bodies of the proper tribe to the battlefield tends to be pretty powerful. We don't have a great version of this for humans. Gather the Townfolk is the closest. That card's so old that it's not even legal in Pioneer. So if you're playing some sort of go wide human deck and you just need 2 human bodies on the battlefield, Honored Knight Captain, pretty good way to get the job done. The other aspect of this card that is interesting is the equipment mode. So far we've mostly focused on just the value of putting multiple bodies on the battlefield for 2 mana, but being able to tutor an equipment directly onto the battlefield is a really powerful effect. So I know it is 6 mana, which is a very high cost. A Stoneforge Mystic, probably the best version of this effect, but like Godo, for example, is a 6 mana equipment tutor. Yeah, it also has some additional upsides to it, but still, like, we see Godo see play. So I think in the right deck, maybe not in Standard, but at least in Commander, being able to sack this to get an artifact can do some super cool things. As far as Standard's concerned, if you're going to play this card as an equipment tutor and not a go wide card, and one of the weird aspects of this card is the decks that really want the equipment tutor don't necessarily take advantage of the 2 bodies that well. The decks that take advantage of the 2 bodies probably aren't playing any equipment, but it works well with expensive equipment, especially expensive equipment that immediately make a body. So like Dissection Tools or Mechanus Arsenal. These are 5 mana equipment that come along with a body. You end up with like a 4/4 lifelinker from Dissection Tools. Mechanus Arsenal can be super big if you got a bunch of artifacts on the battlefield. So in this case, you're using your 1/1 to tutor out a pretty powerful, pretty big equipment. Also worth noting, no sorcery speed restriction here, so you can like wait till your opponent attacks you, sack this, tutor out a big life linker or whatever, a massive blocker to eat your opponent's thing in combat. So maybe not a super competitive plan, but those are the kind of synergies that I think you could take advantage of on our Knight Captain. As far as Commander is concerned, I think the instant speed tutoring is probably my favorite part of this card. You can just leave your mana up, and if your opponent goes to like kill your commander, you can sack this and get a mithril coat that when it enters, it's going to attach to something you control, put it on your commander, fizzle the removal spell, thanks to indestructible. Same with like Hammer of Dazad. So that's a kind of a spicy way to take advantage of this. Just being able to tutor out an equipment at instant speed isn't something that we've really seen before. We have sorcery speed like Godo, Stoneforge style equipment tutors, but I can't think of another card that just puts an equipment directly into play at instant speed, which actually seems pretty powerful. So as far as actual homes for this deck, I think any mono weight equipment deck could consider playing this. If you're playing like Kemba or Cloud or Balin, I don't think this card's busted, but it seems fine. Like, because it makes an extra body, you can sack the original, still have a body on the battlefield to put your equipment on. So in some sort of like casual style equipment deck, I could see this being like very budget Stoneforge Mystic. If you don't want to pay, you know, $50 for Cloud or $50 for Stoneforge, whatever their current price is, this is a way cheaper way that you can do the same thing, not as efficiently, but still, it does kind of serve a very similar purpose. The other place I think this card could be good is in decks that can take advantage of the fact that it adds 2 humans to the battlefield. If you're playing like General Kudrow or Catilda or Adeline, these go-wide human decks, this is just 2 mana, put 2 bodies on the battlefield to benefit from your commander making mana with Catilda, getting big with General Kudrow, pumping your Adeline. Plus, you're not going to be an equipment deck most likely, but having the option to snag a Skull Clamp even to start drawing cards, or the Mithril Coat or a Lightning Greaves to protect your commander actually seems pretty powerful, even if you just have, you know, 1 or 2 random equipment that are really good in your deck to find, and you're not a full-on equipment deck. So Honor Knight Captain, I feel like this card actually pretty good. I know it's not super flashy, it's kind of one of those nuts and bolts cards that holds decks together, but I think we've seen enough similar cards in the past be really good that I would not be surprised if this card was standard playable, maybe in a humans deck in older formats, although that's a little bit more of a stretch. Plus the equipment tutoring can do some really sweet things in Commander. So one of the cool things about the release of Edge of Eternities is it brings with it standard rotation. So we're losing all the Phyrexian sets, which I guess are from like 3 years ago now. And if you had asked me like a year ago what card I was looking forward to rotating the most at this rotation, that card very likely would have been Sunfall. Well, it turns out Sunfall is mostly kind of back in Beyond the Quiet. So Beyond the Quiet, 5 mana sorcery, says exile all creatures and Spacecraft. So in a lot of ways, this is Sunfall at home, I would say. Yes, you get to blow up Spacecraft, which maybe that could be a meaningful upside. In our new standard format, we'll see how big of an impact the Spacecraft from Edge of Eternities have. But it's mostly Sunfall at home because you don't get the Incubate token, which is part of what made Sunfall good. Although honestly, a big part of what I disliked about Sunfall is it just invalidates a lot of strategies. Like if you're trying to do Sephiroth Aristocrat sack stuff with Raise the Past, or recursive stuff with Forsaken Mine or Afterburn Expert, having this Wrath that just comes down and exiles everything forever is actually very obnoxious and kind of pushes those decks out of the meta. Although I think that things are probably going to be fine this time. If you look at our current standard meta, Sunfall is not really a big part of it. The most popular Sunfall deck is the mono white token deck, and in that deck they play a single copy of Sunfall typically. If you look at blue white control, a lot of those decks are actually just playing Ultima over Sunfall as their Wrath. So Sunfall was a really big deal like a year ago, but the way the meta has shifted, the way the meta has evolved, I'm not actually that worried about Beyond the Quiet. Yes, it is annoying, but it might actually function like a good safety valve. It might be powered down enough that this isn't your default Wrath option that you just play in every single deck. Instead, it might be more of a tech card where if we do get a Sephiroth deck or a recursive deck that is way too powerful, you can bring this in. Otherwise, you might be sticking with the Ultima or Day of Judgment, which is cheaper. So I think Beyond the Quiet, unlike Sunfall like a year ago, where it was just clearly the best Wrath in Standard, and you saw in pretty much every single deck that wanted a Wrath, I think Beyond the Quiet is just another Wrath in Standard, and I'm honestly not even sure if it's going to be better than Day of Judgment or it's going to be better than Ultima. I guess you could end up in a meta where it was better, but just in the dark, I'm probably sticking with Day of Judgment in all honesty. if this card is going to be good, it's going to be because Spacecraft are actually good. And at this point, it is just too early to say how much exiling all Spacecraft matters. I do know it's going to be absolutely brutal. If you're playing like Dawnsire or something and you get up to 18 charge counters and you think you're finally going to turn on your big Death Star, and then your opponent just exiles it with Beyond the Quiet. So there are going to be some brutal blowouts with this card. I really don't know what to make of Spacecraft. I still lean towards they're probably not busted by any stretch, but I still think they are probably better than a lot of people give them credit for. I just can't imagine that this huge mechanic, the biggest mechanic, I would say, from Edge of Eternities, is just going to be completely unplayable in Standard. But we'll have to wait and see. We'll have to wait and see how it shakes out. But it's worth keeping in mind, if for some reason Spacecraft become tier 0 in Standard, Beyond the Quiet is a very clean answer to Spacecraft. As far as Commander is concerned, I actually think this card is pretty much stone unplayable, just because there's so many other options. If you think about Sunfall itself, which is probably the closest comparison, Sunfall is very far from a Commander staple. It sees fringe play mostly in like Proliferate style decks or Incubate decks, but you don't just play it as a generic Wrath, because in Commander, you got Farewell, you got Austere Command, you got Wrath of God, you got Cleansing Nova, you get stuff like Hour of Revelation onto Inversion that can just blow up everything, you got Vanquish the Horde that can be super cheap. So unless you're a Crim and you're going to play like 20 Wraths in your deck, I just can't imagine that you get all the way down to Beyond the Quiet in most of your Commander decks. So I think Beyond the Quiet, even though it looks like Sunfall, and I kind of hate Sunfall, I think that it's actually pretty safe. Without the Incubate on it, and with how the meta has developed in Standard, I'm actually not super worried about this card. So yes, Exile All Creatures is an annoying line of text, but I think this one is probably going to be perfectly fine. We also got a new Spacecraft, which I guess you can blow up with Beyond the Quiet, in Synthesizer Labship. So Synthesizer Labship, a 1-mana Spacecraft. It's a blue card. It has 2+ at the beginning of combat on your turn, up to 1 other target artifact you control becomes an artifact creature with base power and toughness of 2/2 and gains flying until end of turn, and then 9+ it gains flying and vigilance. So Synthesizer Labship is very interesting, and I gotta say, there's been a lot of debate over whether Spaceship can see constructed play, and I think that these multi-level, cheaper Spacecraft are going to be the ones that are most designed to see play in a format like Standard. I think the ones that are like +20 and I'm a 6-mana Mythic or whatever, those are probably going to be mostly Commander cards, but something like Synthesizer Labship actually seems pretty easy to turn on. You play it for 1 mana, you only need to tap a 2-power creature to get to its first level, and then eventually, if you want to, you can get it into a relatively big flyer later in the game. So Synthesizer Labship, it's kind of like an Ensoul artifact, an Animating Fairy, a case of the Filch Falcon, one of these cards that can turn one of your artifacts into a creature until end of turn. The downside is it only turns it into a 2/2, which is not a very big creature, although there is nicely you get flying, so you have some evasion, you can swing in past your opponent's blockers, but it works kind of similarly to those cards. And then, if you ever get it fully leveled up, you built yourself a Sarah Angel in 2025, which I know you would never play Sarah Angel in a competitive deck in 2025, but still a 4/4 Flying Vigilance isn't bad. I don't think that's the focus. You're not playing this card with the idea being, okay, I'm going to turbo this up to 9 to get a 4/4 Flying Vigilance. Instead, you're probably playing it to get to 2, and then in some situations, you're like, oh, all right, I got some extra creatures, I can't really attack with them, let's get this up to a 4/4 flyer. So Synthesizer Lab, the thing I like most about this card is you only need to tap 2 or more power worth of creatures to get to its first mode. So in the decks that would want this, which is probably something like the Simic Cookie deck in Standard, it seems very easy to get to that mode. Like, you play this on turn 1, turn 2, you play a Tough Cookie, you make a food token, you tap the Tough Cookie, all of a sudden your Synthesizer Labship is ready to start turning artifacts into creatures. The only problem is, it doesn't give the artifact haste. So if you do the Tough Cookie thing and want to turn like the food token into a 2/2, you can do that, but it's going to be a summoning sick 2/2, or otherwise this would actually be a pretty explosive line, I think. But I think that's kind of the idea. Like, because you only need to get 2 charge counters on it, it seems very, very easy. If you're playing any number of creatures in your deck, that you should at least be able to get to that mode. And then once you get to that mode, you get another Tough Cookie effect, a Zoteic Glyph effect, where you can turn all your random foods and maps and so forth into a creature, get an even more damage. Like I said before, it's only a 2/2, but at least it has flying, which is going to let you chip in for damage. The problem with something like Zoteic Glyph, even though it's really big, or the Tough Cookie 4/4, they're just ground creatures that can get jump blocked by a random 1/1, so it is nice that you get flying out of it. It is also pretty cute with Nutrient Block. I know people love the idea of turning your indestructible artifact into a creature to get an indestructible creature. Honestly, if you want to do Nutrient Block stuff, you're probably better off turning it into a 5/4 or a 4/4 rather than a 2/2 flyer, but still, it is kind of a funny little synergy. The other place that this card is interesting to me is with construct tokens. So if you think about the construct tokens from Simulacrum Synthesizer or Thousand Moon Smithy, these are 0/0s. They get +1/+1 for each artifact you control. So the way this would work with Synthesizer Labship is they would become 2/2s that would still get +1/+1 for each artifact you control. So if you make a 8/8 construct or whatever, with Synthesizer Labship, all of a sudden it becomes a 10/10, but more importantly, it gets flying. You know the issue we were talking about with your Esoteric Glyph creature getting blocked or whatever? Constructs also have that issue. They get super big, but they're just like dorky ground creatures, so your opponent's 1/1s can chump block. But if you have a Synthesizer Labship, all of a sudden the constructs go to the air, getting for a huge amount of damage to close out the game. So I don't think it's like a staple in the artifact decks. I do think this could serve a purpose in like the blue-white artifact deck. Another thing I want to mention about this card is it doesn't work with other Spacecraft as well as you probably would like it to. So yes, if you have a Synthesizer Labship that is at least 2 charge counters on it, you can use it to turn a Dawnsire or an Infinite Guideline Station into a 2/2 creature. The thing is, the creature won't have its abilities, like to actually get 100 damage out of Dawnsire, or turn it into a flyer, which I guess doesn't really matter, or Infinite Guideline Station to draw a bunch of cards when it attacks. You actually need to get the charge counters on it. Just turning it into a creature won't grant the ability. So yes, you can turn your Dawnsire into a 2/2, but it's just going to be a 2/2. On the other hand, this does work really well with vehicles, because vehicles, unlike Spacecraft, their abilities are attached to the card. So if you turn a Salvation Engine into a creature with Synthesizer Labship, you're still going to get its attack trigger to reanimate an artifact, or the Regalia. If you turn it into a creature with Synthesizer Labship, you're still going to ramp when it attacks. So it is kind of a neat vehicle card where you can use this to turn your vehicles on. I don't know how good vehicles are going to be in Standard. We haven't really seen them take off, even though we got a ton of support in Aether Drift. But Synthesizer Labship does seem like the kind of card that could make a vehicle deck better. So Synthesizer Labship, I think this is an interesting Standard card. It's super cheap. It seems easy to get to the first level. In something like the Simic Cookie deck or some sort of artifact deck, I could see this serving a purpose just because it's so efficient, and I'm interested to see if a card like this can actually see play in Standard. We also got a couple more cards from the land sheet in Dust Bowl and Echoing Deep, so nothing super high-end, but some pretty sweet reprints. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Edge of Eternity spoilers for today. So what card from today are you most hyped about? What do you think about our exclusive spoiler cards? Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll be back tomorrow with even more Edge of Eternity spoilers. So until then, have an amazing day, everyone, and I will talk to you soon. Looking for even more magic? Well, check out the Mucha Brew, where we played some Vivian Hollow One in Modern, and you can also find our last spoiler video right here.